Um, Good evening and welcome all. I'm Maria Noida and I'm the curator of Gallery 18 at the Riverdale Y. And it's my pleasure and a privilege to be hosting this event called Crossing the Divide. The question that we're attempting to engage with and to hopefully find some sort of a partial answer to is, at least individually, is how do Blacks and whites make the bridge to each other across the American racial divide? And more specifically, how do I, as an individual, and you as an individual, bridge that gap? First, my thanks to a whole bunch of people. First, my thanks to you participants for coming on board and engaging in this discussion. My thanks to the Riverdale Y, which has been so supportive and so helpful in making this event possible, and in their larger efforts through their DEI initiative, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity, for engaging in these issues and questions. My thanks to Robert Fass, the photographer, whose photo essay became the springboard for this event, and to Pat and Bob Carey, the moderators who will tell their personal story of an interracial marriage in the era of the civil rights movement. This event arose from Robert Fass's exhibit on long married couples in America, and it was entitled As Long as We Both Shall Live. So it had nothing to do with Black-white relations. It was about long married couples. It was installed at the 92nd Street Y some years back, and it had an international tour. And most fortunately and very happily, it found a home at Gallery 18 in March before the shutdown. So Pat and Bob Carey were one of the couples, an interracial couple, in this photo essay, in this exhibit. So Robert, perhaps you could tell us how you found Pat and Bob, and also just give a shout out to the exhibit, which is online and which the participants might be really interested in looking at some point, because it's a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. And anyway, I turn it over to you, Robert.
Thanks, Maria. And thanks to you and the Y for putting this evening together. I had the great fortune to meet and enlist Pat and Bob Carey into As Long as We Both Shall Live, thanks to a chance encounter on a crosstown bus. There was actually a different couple that I had been hoping to engage in the project. I had never met them, but I spotted two people on the bus who I thought might be them, and I went and introduced myself, and it was indeed that couple. In the time it took us across Central Park, I learned that they weren't able to participate, but as I further explained the project and the aspects of diversity that I was seeking, the wife turned to the husband and said, "What about Bob and Pat Carey?" And so I was led to these two extraordinary individuals who make this extraordinary pair. And I'm so grateful for the openness and honesty and depth of experience that they shared with me, their eloquence, and the friendship they've offered to my wife Linda and me over the nearly 20 years since we did.
Oh my God.
Oh.
So I invite everyone to visit the project website. Thanks for that plug, Maria. It's longmarriedcouples.com, and you can read the full interview there with Bob and Pat and about 3 dozen other couples. Just click through till you see the thumbnail images on the side. You'll see the picture that we used for this event, and you'll be rewarded with a great story, some beautiful insights into marriage, and a bit of a history lesson as well. Longmarriedcouples.com. Back to you.
Thank you, Robert.
Looking forward.
Thank you. Pat and Bob have a particularly compelling story. Now, when the Y shut down, I, along with a whole bunch of other people, were casting about in terms of, what do we do now? What could make a significant online event or exhibit? And I really put it off for a while because I didn't want to do the obvious. And then came the Black Lives Matter protests, which erupted all across the country and indeed the world. And it occurred to me then that Pat and Bob would be the perfect moderators by telling their personal story for an intro into this question and to discuss the question. and now in very, very short summary, Pat and Bob met because they were engaged in civil rights activities. They married in 1965 when it was still illegal in Georgia and in other states as well. And it was only 2 years later when the Supreme Court decision came down, making it legal for interracial marriages throughout the United States, that they could in fact return to Georgia. So there were a number of almost insurmountable odds. One was that it was illegal in their state. The second was that it was societally frowned upon. And the third was that both their families were dead set against it. So in the face of those odds, they actually managed to marry, and 55 or so years later, they remain very happily married. So the question, of course, arises, how did you manage to cross the divide? And I'm going to turn it over in just one moment, but I just want to make it clear to the participants how the evening is structured. Okay, so what we want to do is basically allow for an uninterrupted presentation by Pat and Bob. You see the chat button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on it and write whatever questions you want throughout the presentation, indeed at any time. And when the presentation is completed, we'll go back and we'll look at those questions. So with that, I am just about ready to turn it over. I just want to introduce them. Bob is a teacher and Dean of Graduate Studies at Empire State College, and Pat is an Assistant Chancellor and an Associate Dean at New York University's Steinhardt School of Education. And they have 2 children, and I welcome them heartily, and I turn it over to you. Take it away.
Mm-hmm. And we probably should update our resumes because we're both retired now.
Oh.
So I'm a Dean Emerita. And
okay.
And Bob is a Dean Emerita. So, you know, we're still married and we're Dean Emerita. How about that?
That's wonderful.
And we have been married, as I say, forever. So how did we meet? And, you know, it really goes back to our childhood. We grew up in 2 households, one on the East Coast and one in the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago. Bob was in Connecticut. We grew up in homes in which values were taught. Love your neighbor as yourself. Be kind. Do service to others. Not in those obvious ways where we taught, you know, we weren't sat down and said, do good for others, but in many different ways we were taught that it was good to serve. It was good to be kind, that all people were equal, and all people mattered. I mattered. My neighbor mattered. And so Bob's father was a doctor. My father was a minister. We found our way to college, and I've got to jump over many years because otherwise we will have you here all night with these stories. But we were in college, and so being taught to be involved, we became involved. And what drew us together, what seemed like insurmountable boundaries, what brought us together was this project called Operation Crossroads to Africa. Operation Crossroads to Africa was a work-study program that took college students to parts of Africa, West Africa at the time, to work on community service projects with the community. I built cement steps down a very steep hill, which led to the only stream in the village. And subsequently,
Eastern Africa, Eastern Nigeria.
Eastern Nigeria, yes. And Bob built houses.
No, schools. We were working on schools. with local Masons.
Right. See, this is what happens when you're married so long. Your spouse starts interrupting you and correcting you, and you don't even get angry because,
So keep going.
and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So,
But
Yes.
just to observe one
Yes.
thing that Pat captures, that at the time we were going to college, I mean, some of this is ancient history, but it's important to understanding what our understanding of divides meant then
yes,
and what our sense of bridging divides means now.
right.
And that is that we were both in college during the end of the Eisenhower years and the beginning of the Kennedy years. And it was an enormous sense, as I remember it, from my undergraduate work at Wesleyan, of optimism, new beginnings, new possibilities, you know, the new frontier. Ask not what you can do for your country, that sort of thing. Or not what you can do for your country, do for others. So that the Crossroads Africa, coming as it did, just seemed perfect. It's just the right thing to do at the right time. So in one sense, what we were unaware of at the time, but what made our meeting possible was that two doors had opened that we could really meet in a common space. You know, thinking back on it, without Crossroads Africa and that opportunity to meet and work together and do a bunch of other different things, we probably wouldn't be here today. So
I thought Bob was kind of cute. And so during the orientation in Washington, we hung out. You know, it's a big orientation with students wanting to change the world. So we got to our locations, but decided that we would stay in touch over the summer because Crossroads was a summer experience. And at the end of the summer, we decided we would stay in touch because we thought, hey, maybe it would be nice to stay in touch. And so we began to call each other, to write. And to make that story short, we had a 4.5-year romance.
yeah,
Before we
very Victorian courtship,
Yeah.
Victorian courtship, very epistolary, you know, sort of. But yeah, go ahead.
because during that time we actually and let me clarify, Bob was in you were in Connecticut, right?
No, New York City. I was in
You were in New York City.
Seminary.
And I was in Chicago.
Right.
But we were corresponding with each other
Right.
on issues that we
Right.
we knew divided us.
Right. I
You
mean,
know,
those sort
yes.
of letters that I don't know if people write letters anymore, but those are the kind of letters that if you read them now, you might hold your head a little bit. But you know, they were the large themes, and but it was a way of sort of talking through what we were about, who we thought we were, and what our future was, and what happened as that was moving on is I had the opportunity to then go to Atlanta to work in Ebenezer Baptist Church as an assistant pastor in Dr. King's church. And it was with that move that, although we didn't know it at the time, our future began to, in a sense, sort itself out. Because with my going to Atlanta, by the time I went to Atlanta in '63, our relationship had progressed far enough for my family to be alarmed. I don't know about Pat's family. I think they were in the early stages of being alarmed. But what it meant was that, as it turns out, Atlanta was the opportunity for us to really begin to explore whether or not we were going to share our future together. And Atlanta is the source of, all kinds of stories because at the time, I was living in what was called Mennonite House, which was just literally around the corner, 2 to 3 blocks away from Ebenezer Church. And that was run by the Mennonite Central Committee. And these were Mennonites, as you know, have a tradition of service. And so Mennonites would come from Kansas and Indiana and the Midwest and come to Mennonite House and live there and do community service, whether it was building something, working in daycare and other things. And
Working in the civil rights
and
movement.
working in the civil rights movement, because it was a big, big place for civil rights workers on their way to South Georgia, during the voter registration drive in Mississippi, to stop, because the guy running it, Vincent Harding, was a key player in the nonviolent movement. So I was there, and then we decided, okay, this is, we need to really begin to think things through. So Pat was going to come to Atlanta. Now, that really set off all the alarm bells on our family side, and she can tell you about that.
Yes, because there were big family councils asking me not to go. The councils consisted of my sisters and my best friends. And I remember one best friend saying, "But Pat, don't go this time." And I said, "This time? But this is my only time. I'm in love." And so, and this is a time when I can really sort it out, at least try to help me sort out what it is I want to do in terms of my relationship with Bob. And so my father said, finally, he says, "Well, if you go, they will lynch you, because in the South, when they see Black and white couples together, they usually find you and they will kill you." And I said,
I think he threatened to call
and
the
he
sheriff,
was
right?
going to call the sheriff.
Right.
But you see, in thinking about it, my father had gone through Jim Crow, and he had witnessed segregation and all of the horrors of being the other. And so he was afraid. He was afraid for me. And this was the way he thought he could control me. But as I said to him, "But this is the way you taught me. You taught me to stand up for what I believe and fight for it."
And I remember flying up to Chicago from Atlanta to support this, what we were thinking of doing. And her dad and I spent the better part of an afternoon really going at this whole issue. And part of it I could fully appreciate and deeply appreciate now, the fear that he felt for his daughter's safety, even as though I thought I was just being very straightforward and above board and all the rest. But we would find that his fears were well grounded.
Yes.
In the texture of American life, and certainly as it presented itself in Atlanta in the 60s. So I flew back to Atlanta, and Pat packed her bags and
Came to Atlanta. But I was a little more responsible. I did apply for a job in Atlanta as a counselor. I was hired sight unseen. However, when I showed up, the boss looks at me and says, "Oh, we made a terrible mistake. You would never fit in here." I knew this was a war that I would not win. And so I said, thank you very much. And I walked out.
And that was a state job, wasn't it, that you
Uh,
had applied for?
No, it was an agency.
An agency, right?
Yes,
Okay.
right. I did get a position with a daycare center in Atlanta, and wonderful, helping children in a daycare center and their families with social services. But I mean, it was quite true. In Atlanta, segregation was real, and I had not experienced the onslaught of segregation so closely before. I guess I was really shielded from it. I had gone to integrated schools. I integrated my elementary school.
Tell them the story about, well, that's another time. Right?
Yeah, because we'll go on and on. But in Atlanta, Bob and I did get very much involved. I mean, I lived in the commune as well. You know, which obviously also abutted Dr. King's home. So we were able to go around and often speak with him and his family, get to know them. But we were privileged to participate in activities in Atlanta, like the Morehouse Spelman Players.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there were some fun things that we were able to do and, you know, sort of get away from the everyday of, oh, you don't belong here.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that was very interesting, you know, as we were reflecting on some of the things we could talk about, was that there's, even in a very segregated society, and I mean, Atlanta at that point was, like the rest of the South, visibly and militantly segregated. So that, for example, when Mennonite House was first opened, and it was clear that that blacks and whites were living in the same house, and it actually added another house as the community grew. It was not uncommon for the police to arrive, to hassle Vincent and the residents. And when I first went to Atlanta, and I stayed with the Kings, with Father King, Daddy King, and Mrs. King. I worked most closely with them and was involved in some of the SCLC and local things in Atlanta. They were very clear about, you know, I sort of got their version of the talk. These are the things to be alert to and to be apprised of. And that came home to me very vividly. One day we were taking the kids from the church. We're going to go on a picnic to a nearby state park, just outside of Atlanta, toward Decatur, and Decatur or Marietta, one of the close-in cities. But there were a nice park that we were going to go to, and at that point, the church had a kind of beat up old Ford station wagon. Still worked, but not in the best of condition. And as it turned out, as we were on our way to the state park, we were on the road, coming down a little incline, and it looked like a traffic stop up ahead of us. And as luck would have it, the manifold on our engine fell off. So I sounded like a tractor, you know, a tank actually, rolling over the countryside, and we're stopped. And I was promptly told, once the state trooper looked at me, looked at who was in the car, asked our business, and I told him, and he said, well, you're under arrest. And so we had to follow him into, I'll say it was Decatur. I was put in a holding tank. The kids in the car were out in the jailhouse yard. Somebody had gotten on the phone to Atlanta to get somebody up here as quickly as possible. And I was in the holding tank and just sitting by myself, trying to pretend to be invisible.
May I interpolate a question here?
Sure.
What were the charges? What,
You know, I never really, I think I was charged with, you know, I'd forgotten. The best I can recollect is operating an unsafe vehicle.
yeah, okay.
But I mean, almost any charge would do, because one of the things I realized
You
is,
was a white person
yeah, you know,
driving all these black kids.
right, you know, so I had stepped out of a proper role, you know. I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing. You know, if we had flipped this, and I could, let me give you one of the things in the courtroom. I was hauled, you know, finally I was called before a judge. I guess it's the equivalent of night court or something. And stepped into the docket, and he was all, you know, sweetness and how are you and this and that. And we seemed to have a little difficulty here until somebody handed him the file as to what I was being charged with, and his demeanor changed immediately. Clearly, this is some carpetbagging Yankee, no good, you know, trouble raiser coming to disturb our people. And he lectured me very, very sternly. And I acceded to that. I listened attentively. And I got off basically with a fine that was paid. And then I was driven back with everyone else to Atlanta, where we all got home safe and sound. But it was one of those things where the structures of power and the structures of who says what you can do and not do became immediately visible. He had a gun. He had control over life and death. And it occurred to me that, you know, you could go missing very easily when someone has that much power and you have no place to stand.
Yes.
And so one of the things we laughed about, looking back on our experiences in Atlanta, was how do you get home at night? If we were meeting with friends, we used to get together with friends every Friday night for fried fish and just to gossip and chat and carry on. And if I was driving, we were coming from one side of Atlanta, all Black community, to another side of Atlanta, where Ebenezer was and where Mennonite House was, and that was another Black community. Atlanta at that time was just beginning to have all the interstates come through the downtown and cut up some of these historically Black communities. Pat would not ride in the front seat. She would ride in the back seat and would lie down. So she would not be visible in
the car.
In the car. So it just looked like I'm just another dude driving my car on my way home, you know, after a long day. And there were things like that you became acutely aware of. One time we went with friends from Mennonite House. There were a sizable group by then. And we went to a theater out on Peachtree in the north part of Atlanta, in one of the tonier neighborhoods. And we paid our money. And when we sat down to watch the movie, we became aware after a while that there was no one sitting around us. It's as though we literally, you know, everybody had pushed back as though they were, you know, social distancing before there was social distancing. But they were making visible that this was something strange and anomalous. And it made for a kind of slightly unsettling viewing experience, although we got through the movie without incident. But that was kind of thing that we found ourselves negotiating, even as we were beginning to talk seriously about not if we were going to get married, but when we were going to get married. And in the meantime, you know, Pat was working at her daycare center, and I was working first with Ebenezer Baptist Church, and then with the Atlanta Council on Human Relations, where I was an acting director for a year. Maria, you had a question? Oh, okay. So some other incidents, because part of this notion of crossing the divide, I think, is a happy phrase, because one of the things I became increasingly aware of was,
want some water?
yeah, I'll have some water, is that this constant stepping out of one world into another world. And you were aware that there were agreed upon portals where that was everyday business. And then there were other portals where you shouldn't be here, be here at all. Excuse me, go ahead. You want to talk?
Right, no, I just want to know if you wanted water. Right.
Let me give you an example of what I mean. Another example of what I mean. And we've got a few. One of the things that
Maybe we can take some questions.
was there were two things that I remember as being a big deal in Atlanta at the time we were there. One was the playing of Gone with the Wind. And this was played at the Fox Theater on Peachtree, and it was a big deal. I mean, this was put on your fancies and people would show up. And the other was the Queen's birthday, that the British consulate, or office of the consulate, they threw a big party, and it was a big soiree, and it was, you know, really nice, very classy. And as acting director of the Atlanta Council on Human Relations, I got invited to go to the Queen's birthday party. Why not?
Along with a guest.
Along with a guest. So my guest was, guess who? My, you know, bride information.
Right.
And so we showed up, and, you know, there were the usual munchable shrimps and other things, and champagne and white wine. And it was all very swank and very nice. And at one point, a woman, white woman,
Oh dear, you're frozen. KP?
Yeah, let's give it a moment for them to reconnect. I'm not sure what happened on their end.
Okay.
We've got a few questions already, and just want to reiterate, people can fill the chat with questions for Bob and Pat. This might be a good moment to form some.
If we could unmute the participants, the question we were really trying to come to, and I'm wondering if we can at least try it now in an open discussion.
Sorry to cut you off, Maria. Bob and Pat should be back shortly. They're going to be calling in.
Okay. Okay. But let me just say, you know, that the question we're trying to come to on an individual basis is what can I personally do to bridge a divide? Because my whole feeling is that this can only happen on a personal basis. It can't be something that, you say, okay, I'm going to belong to a group and we're going to cogitate and think about, the black-white relations and oh, how bad it is and what might be done. No, it's more a question of how do I make an effort to enter a different world? And it's really a personal choice. And I just want to say that, my personal choice, for example, because I'm a writer, is that I participated in workshops in Harlem and also in open mics, either uptown or all the way downtown on the Lower East Side at the Nuyorican Poetry Cafe, which is a very, very diverse venue, very welcoming, an awful lot of fun, and very safe. And so it's a question of what activity do you do? What are you comfortable with? What do you like doing, like a book club or a cooking class or something of that nature? And find a venue that is very diverse, not something, if you're living on Fifth Avenue, that's directly in your neighborhood, you understand, but somewhere totally different where you would run into, people who are not your color, people who are not your race, and people who are not your background. So I just wondered until they come back on, whether anybody had something to say about that or had a suggestion or something of that nature. But for that, we would have to unmute.
So everyone can unmute as they see fit.
Oh, okay.
Hi,
Hi, who's talking?
Alethea.
Oh my God! Well, sorry.
Thank you for the excitement.
Yes, hi, Alethea.
How are you?
Oh,
So I just chimed in like maybe 2 minutes ago. So I'm hearing that, and so I would say there are always some kind of art organization that has this bridging of gaps, poets and writers, the Pen and Brush, the Harlem Arts Alliance, the Manhattan Cultural Center, and there are already groups that exist. So if it's really just a plug into what's happening and you attend the venues that are less diverse, that are in a Black caucus, if you will, of artists who are doing a medium that you are connecting with, then that's one way. The other thing is there are always cultural listings of things that are happening that identify who's participating. So by being merely part of what's happening, that gives you a shoe-in to begin to start building those kind of relationships. So when things happen, you'll know where to look and where they're going on.
Thank you. Does someone else want to comment?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
What-
Lindsay.
No, I liked very much what you said, joining groups that would have doing things that I'm interested in. I have to say that I'm not connected to the fine arts, but I am connected to politics, or what groups do you think? Can you give me any? I wrote down the Manhattan Cultural Center. That sounded it might be interesting.
Well, the Democratic Club, the Republican clubs have different Black caucuses that actually have meetings monthly, and they will list, even in arts and culture, what things they are spearheading their time with doing. So really, if you just identify with what lane you're in, and then doing the outreach in those organizations that are spearheading things with Black people, then you'll find a pathway, because all it really just requires is you to begin the pathway, because in the networking world, the moment you open that door, the floodgates open, because you'll see a plethora of things that you didn't have access to because you weren't moving in that circle.
Okay, so Pat and
Oh, yeah.
Oh dear.
We need to mute again.
okay,
Okay, good.
We're back.
Okay, I just want to thank Lindsay and Alethea for their comments because we were discussing the question while you were so rudely interrupted of, you know, how can give some suggestions for what do you do to as an individual to,
Right.
you know, make this cross the divide. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a good question. Well, one of the things I heard you say about being involved is
Getting
you
up.
literally have to sort of leave the house. You have to go out
Of your
and
comfort
go
zone.
somewhere that you haven't been before.
Yeah.
Because then, only then, I mean, I'm reflecting on my own experience growing up in Connecticut. And I was very much used to New England sorting out of ethnic hierarchies, you know. In Meriden, Connecticut, where I grew up, you know, there was St. Stan's, a big Polish Catholic church. There was St. Joseph's, Italian Catholic. So in New England, you were used to sorting out how everyone was layered, you know, and in terms of ethnically or in, you know, Protestant versus Catholic, that sort of thing. That was sort of the rubrics, and race figured in there, but not as immediately vividly, at least that was my experience growing up, as ethnic and religious identity. When I went to the South, I thought, oh, okay, I see what they mean by things being in black and white. It was absolute, that was it. And that's when you came up against, you know, the one. Now, I can remember going to a family reunion when I was at Ebenezer and looking around and thinking, wow, this is some family, because there were people there, you know, the shades of color ran from, you know, white, blue-eyed, you know, straight hair and all that, to dark, to mocha, to whatever you want. So that was the American genetic tree. But you also saw that, you know, that was also the visual realization that the one drop rule in American life was one drop and you're black. So it was that notion that you really had two almost hermetically sealed worlds. And if you pass from one to the other, then there was going to be, at a minimum, some turbulence or worse. And this is where I think, you know, it was interesting when Pat and I really decided, okay, we're going to get married. We're going to, you know, this is serious. We want to do this. So we were going to get our wedding rings. Now, the way we had to get our wedding rings in Atlanta at the time, remember, because I was there before the Supreme Court even heard about Loving versus the state of Virginia. We had to go on separate days into the same jewelry store to look at wedding rings. So did you go first or did I go first?
You went first.
So I went in and looked and saw what looked to be, you know, fairly nice, handsome wedding rings. We since got them changed, but that's another story, another Zoom adventure. So I went in and I said, okay, this is where it is. Look right here. And then she went in on the following day and looked, and we agreed that, okay, those are pretty good. So we had them made and we got all of those. But the idea of going in there together, saying, hi,
That was not
yeah,
to
we're
be.
gonna, you know, we're gonna pick out our wedding rings, just didn't do that. You just did not do that. And there were other things like that where you were very acutely aware of the two worlds division and how those doorways swang or didn't swing. I mean, the most vivid example of that I can think of was when I was with the Atlanta Council on Human Relations, and one of my board members took me to a Klan meeting at Stone Mountain in Georgia. Now this is, the navel of the world for the Klan. And it was a combination of being very scary and very silly. People walking around in sheets. But it also was very vivid representation of a sense of we must be in control, we must prevail, we must do that. And that you begin to just walk with a radar that, I'm going to avoid going here, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
And these are things you just don't want to do. Because even local demonstrations for one of the chicken shack places in Atlanta, and for a cheap burger place, like a White Castle. It was an Atlanta equivalent of people were demonstrating they wanted to be. It was a sit-in kind of service. Those were always fraught with danger, and you just realized that things could go south very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I want to actually start with a couple of the questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Because there was one early on, which is what issues divided you, and it's an interest. It fits in with the question that the larger question that I'm formulating for everyone, which is bridging a certain divide, and without putting words in your mouth. I know from the interview, you were talking about some of the issues that you as a couple faced, but they weren't necessarily black-white issues. They were man-woman issues.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And and that somehow you got over, which is, I know, very difficult to do. Somehow you got over, he's doing it because he's white, or she's saying this because she's black.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did you manage to? That's part of the divide, I think, that we have to cross, because we make judgments that are that are not true. It's simply it's simply a fiction in our heads, or
Right.
whatever. So what issues divided you, and how did you get over the whole thing about man woman, yes, but also black white? Do you understand what I?
No, I think
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
I mean, do you want to take a crack? at it?
No, you go,
Okay.
because I'm
I think
thinking
there's
about.
I think there's a progression in there, because one of the things, I mean, the list of what we talked about is like, do you want to have children?
Yeah.
Because of course your parents, that was the first thing out of their mouth. What about the
What
children?
about the kids?
And what they were asking us, what kind of kids are these?
Where will they fit?
Where will they fit? So that was the whole social anxiety piece, I think.
Yeah.
So we had to, decide on, well, do we want to have kids? Do we want to deal with what that's going to involve? And yes, we decided that we wanted to do that.
Yeah.
We want to
Yeah.
have a family and this sort of thing.
Sure.
Careers. Pat had no intention of sitting down with Betty Crocker and making me biscuits every day. I mean, that
Absolutely
wasn't
not.
going to happen. So who was going to do what became an issue. And so I had to sit down with Betty Crocker more often than not. But those were some of the things we began to really negotiate.
Right. And learn
So-
how to vacuum.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
No, I
Yeah.
became an ace
Yeah.
vacuumer.
So,
But
some of these things were just the things that couples work out as couples. There comes a point where you have to say, I am marrying Bob. I'm not marrying white Bob. I'm marrying Bob. and Bob is marrying Pat, not Black Pat. When we fight, I don't think we've ever said, you did that because you're white. I mean, I've never said that. And Bob has never said, oh, you've done that because you were Black.
But you never think it.
No,
I think,
no.
yeah, because I think
No.
Pat puts it right. I mean, I think one of the things is that that happens is I think what every couple has to wrestle with is, do I see this person in the round?
Right.
The day in, day out person, not the sort of taken for granted or who I think she should be or who I think I want her to be, but who she really is.
Right.
So, and one of the things we agreed to do when we were early on in our marriage is to never let the day end without talking it through.
Whatever
Whatever
it was.
that day had been, so that whatever was, nagging, like that wisdom tooth that wants to come out, could really be addressed. And that really became kind of a discipline, a kind of rehearsing and revisiting what we valued in being with each other. Because marriages don't look after themselves. They
have to be nurtured.
They need, water,
right.
fertilizer, and
Right,
stuff like that.
right.
And the challenge of every day is to stand back and sort of be a little bit amazed about what you're doing, but to keep at it. And and having children also made that very sharply critical for us. I remember the kids being interviewed by somebody, I don't know, some reporter was doing a project on school-age children, I guess, and the reporter asked them, what did they, think about having interracial parents, a white father and a Black mother. And I think, I don't know if it was our son or daughter said, well, we don't have any problem with that because they're still married. And most of their friends were finding themselves, in divorce situations, and kids were going through that. So, and I remember one time we went to a party we began looking around. We thought, gee, everybody here is an interracial couple. And we began listening to folks tell their story. And most of the stories were about not telling their parents, not being candid with, family, basically, about the decision they had made, why they had made it, what they were going to do. And we felt just a little bit, that felt that was a little off-putting in the sense that, well, you owe that to each other. And we didn't want to sort of become part of, our own very select group. So we didn't go there. But I think there is that notion when you're talking about stepping out and stepping beyond, you are stepping into something that is new to both parties to that relationship,
right.
Because everything about Black-White says, don't go there, you shouldn't go there, and that needs, you just need to make that step and become involved and keep working at it, working at it.
Yeah.
We did have a question about what challenges your children faced.
Don't say about that.
The challenges they faced.
Well, I think
go on.
Well, I think part of that was, who are you?
Yeah, where you fit.
Yeah, where do you fit? and we had some of this when they were in school, you know, like what parents group should we be in? Because we were an interracial couple. And the kids had to deal with navigating their own racial identity in terms of school and school friends. I think they were fortunate in having very good, very close and very active school friends as they were growing up, and have a wide circle of friends now. So they're very much at home in their own bodies and who they are. And we're very close. I mean, we talk every week. We do birthdays, we do anniversaries, and now they're grown. I mean, they're, you know, beginning, they're in their 50s, right? Yeah. Almost, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
They're older.
right. Yeah, they're having their own middle
Right,
life
right,
crisis
right.
now. Right?
But, you know, one of
So-
the things I wanted to say was we decided early on, we were not out to convince everybody that they should make the choices we have made. We only ask that people respect our choice. And as we respect their choices, you know, as long as their choices don't hurt us and their choices don't, our choices don't hurt them, you know?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we found that some interracial couples, oh yes, this is the way to go. Well, what is that way? I mean, what does that even mean? Is that a magic potion? You know, put it in a bottle, we can sell it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, I mean, unfortunately, there are these misconceptions. But again, you know, crossing that divide, it is stepping outside your comfort zone. We hear that a lot now. Daring to do something that's different. There's the person who walks her dog every single day at the same time, you know, on our block. And we often see her because we're sitting on our stoop. And so one day I decided, she keeps walking back and forth, I'm going to say hello, because she never said hello. I started saying hello. And she started saying hello back. And I said, well, my goodness. And one of these days soon, I'm going to ask her, oh, what is your name? Or I might ask her, well, what is your dog's name? Or what kind of dog do you have, since I don't know what dogs are, what, you know, brand of dogs are. But the point here is just reaching out. And, you know, you don't have to like everything about everybody. But if you want to make a difference, if you want to break down some of those barriers, you know, you got to take some steps, and you got to risk it.
Yeah.
You know, so what if you can't make a mistake? What mistake can you make?
I think that's probably, I mean, there's two dimensions, it seems to me, Maria, to that question. Is the first, are you comfortable in your relationship and your circle of friends? And you know, we've been very, very happy in both circumstances, even while we know that, you know, this country is still very much in the throes and in the grip of a kind of racial caste system that is reluctantly, you know, it's reluctant to change, and it's being forced to change. But if people want to, or feel the need to, step out of where they are and step into places where they haven't been, two things. One, it will afford them a new perspective on the world in which we all live and which we share. And two, will introduce them to new possibilities. that I think are important to grab hold of. I mean, for me, one of the happiest instances of that was, again, to go back to Atlanta. We got to know some folks who were associated with the Spelman Morehouse Players.
Yeah.
And this was, quite by accident and just because of a string of associations. As it turns out,
Spelman College.
right?
And Morehouse College.
And Morehouse College. They had this joint theater program. And we got to know the head of the department and the director. And so we both ended up being in some plays, South Pacific and The Fantastics, which I don't know if it's still playing in New York, but maybe it stopped. But anyway, so we were both in this production, which was like super good. And let me see, which was it? South Pacific. Can you imagine me and Ezio Pinza? So I'm singing, One Enchanted Evening, and I'm kissing Nellie Bly, and and the audience goes, oh my goodness, this is very, very, very daring theatrics, but it was absolutely fantastic. It was a great moment. And we did it again with the Fantastics, which was a really great production. But I think that only happens when you leave the house, close the door, and find yourself immersed in something that you believe in, you want to contribute to, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be grand, but it's something that you can join others in and begin to hear their histories, be nourished by their histories, and share your own.
Now, there is a question about that, or close to that, and that is, what did you learn about your spouse's cultural heritage over time?
Oh, I've got a great story. Let me give you a very good story about that.
All right.
This was our first Thanksgiving.
Oh.
Our first Thanksgiving.
And we lived in a studio apartment.
Right. So it's very small. It's very small.
Yes.
So what happened was we brought both our cookbooks to Thanksgiving. Now, we both agreed on a turkey dressing, okay? But New England, I had creamed onions. Had to have creamed onions.
And I did.
Grew up with creamed onions. Pat didn't have creamed onions. You had
macaroni and cheese.
Macaroni and cheese. And
yes, and we had greens.
We had greens. And let me see. Then of course, we had dressing and
sweet potato souffle.
Sweet potato souffle, plus pumpkin pie.
Cranberries.
And pecan pie. Now, we had food all over our kitchen and over
and we years. I think we had two guests.
Two guests, right, who couldn't believe, who are you feeding?
We had scrunched everybody in.
Right. But it was one of those things where, those things kind of filter in and you sort out your cookbook as to the things you hold on to and the things you add. And it becomes a kind of melange. So,
Right.
Okay, so we've got another question, and then I also have two questions I want to ask you. But
okay.
The question is, do you think today interracial marriages are more common or easy?
I think they are more common across different sectors. Black, white, Black, Asian, white, Asian, Latino, Black. So many different combinations.
And I can just, if I could just add, because I looked up this statistic, I was very interested.
Okay.
So 17% of new marriages in 2019 were interracial marriages, and the majority of them were, in fact, Black, white. But so it's a fairly significant figure.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as to whether it's easier, I think that's a question you ask of every marriage. But certainly, my experience of just watching the world change around us, one of the things that, I mean, you didn't see and remarked on were interracial couples. Now it's rather more common. It's rather more taken for granted. And I expect that will, the browning of America is happening. And that's part of one of the things we're seeing. My hope is that, people are, as I said at a toast at one wedding that we attended, I hope you are as married as long as we have been, so you can offer a toast to newlyweds to wish them Godspeed.
Mhm.
So I would say that to any newly married
Right.
couple, good luck. Make sure you have a kitchen table you can sit at to talk about things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to nurture that relationship.
Yeah.
Marriage is, it's difficult, two people getting together and deciding that, we've got to figure out how we're going to make this work forever. And with all of the challenges and the pressures. And so you have that, and then you have all those other pressures on top. And if you haven't worked out who you are in terms of who you are, and what you want to be, then there can be some hard roads ahead.
Yeah.
So yes.
I think one of the things we were extraordinarily lucky as I look back on it, and that is that both of us had careers that we really enjoyed and that we didn't have to leave. That, Pat was at NYU for
almost 40 years.
Yeah, and I was.
I'm 100 years old.
Well, you don't look it.
Right. It's my cooking.
Yeah.
And I was at Empire State College, which when I joined it was a brand new college in the SUNY system. And I retired in 2018. And over the course of that, did a bunch of stuff in the college, this and that and the other thing, among them being a dean. But that's occupational stability, a kind of taken for granted,
Right.
day in, day out, made it, gave you a kind of solid floor to stand on. And I think we were very, very lucky in that respect,
Mhm.
that we didn't have to change jobs a lot or go through a whole bunch of those changes.
Okay, so now I want to get to my own two questions, which is, have we made progress? Because we're, again, coming back to crossing the divide. Have we made progress is the first question. And the second question is, what hasn't changed?
Okay,
Which is
well,
the more important one, maybe.
yeah, I remember saying this to one of Pat's groups when somebody asked a very, very similar question, and that is, have we made progress? Yes, I think we have. And how can you tell? Well, because a lot of people are really engaged and involved. I mean, one of the things that,
Mhm.
one way of measuring that is that looking back over our own experience, that push coming from the 60s, the civil rights movement, Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act, the long-term effects of that have reshaped in many ways our society, so that the idea of Kamala Harris being a vice presidential candidate is now greeted as, wow, what a terrific idea,
Right.
by significant numbers of people. Just as Obama being president was cheered by many, we thought, oh my goodness, are we in a new world? Even as it enraged many others. So one of the things that happens as a sign of progress is you can almost hear the ice breaking.
Mhm.
But when ice breaks, there's damage and possible all kinds of things
Mhm.
following the heels of that.
Mhm.
So it's progress always with a price,
Right.
because dismantling essentially a caste system based on race is going to take a lot of doing, just like you're doing it here. Just like, we're in this exploring our own lived experience
Mhm.
and how we see each other and interact with each other. Um,
I've got one more interesting question, if I might.
Yep.
If I might, because we've got only 5 minutes left.
oh, my
Okay.
goodness. Okay.
Do your children actively subscribe to one cultural heritage more than the other? I guess she means in terms of music, art, image, diet, friends, partners dated from youth to adulthood. So do they go in one direction or another culturally?
I don't know.
I don't, they have friends in all cultures, both cultures.
Yeah, I think they move
They
back
dated.
and forth
They
very
dated also.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're they're multicultural.
Okay.
I mean, it's like being in a bilingual family. Put it that way. I think language is closer to it. It's like being bilingual. You've got both, and you can navigate both because you know the dimensions of both, and they're part of who you are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just like, it's interesting. Come back to the Kamala Harris experience. We say she's a Black woman of Asian descent. So we're getting
Yeah.
into the mocha colors. We're getting into, I am, I mean, somebody's going to have to do a musical about this where we get them all lined up. But it's that kind of thing. That's what will be,
Right.
because to say, I am, an African American, Anglo, whatever, pretty soon we'll have hyphens out to the margins,
Right. Yeah.
because that is happening.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
happening.
And there is so much hope seeing all of the young people out
Yeah.
and actively engaged. I consider myself still young, certainly young at heart, but to see all of the young people out doing what they need to do
Right.
in order to change this world, it is absolutely encouraging.
I think we are almost out of time. I want to piggyback on something, if I might, because I'm a writer, right? And, and I love reading stuff. But it's something that you said about you've got to get out. You've got to get out and do. You've got to make that connection. It's not a question of thinking it. You have to step out of your life.
That's right.
And I wanted to just reference James Baldwin, who has
Oh, yes.
got to be one of the most, if not the most honest writer when it comes to Black-white relations. And I just wanted to read 2 sentences. He has an essay called In Search of a Majority. And basically what he's saying is that whatever happens to Blacks is happening to whites. And, we're
Yes.
linked. We're inextricably linked. And there's no way around this, is what he says. So he says, we have to take down these artificial walls.
Right.
So that, and create a country where there are no minorities. And he said, perhaps for the first time in the history of the world, which I think is absolutely wonderful. But he ends it with, I want to suggest that the majority for which everyone is seeking must reassess and release us from our past and deal with the present and create standards worthy of what a man may be. And then he says, this majority is you. No one else can do it.
Yeah.
So the individual, no one else can do it. The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. And so, I just want to leave, everyone with that thought, because I think it is so beautifully expressed. And now I guess I want to thank Oh, Bob and and Pat, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you too for the exhibit that gave birth to this. Thank you all the participants. I hope we can do something like this again, or something, to go further. And I need to thank the Riverdale Y again for giving us this opportunity, and to KP Villar, who is the technician, who made it possible too.
Great.
I'm Maria Noida, and I am wishing you all a good night and many good tomorrows.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Pat and Bob.
Night.
Mwah.
Good night.